A case of international intrigue ends as 3 prisoners return home. Hi there, I'm Jeff, and you are listening to Plain English, where you can upgrade your English while learning about current events and trending topics. JR is the producer, as always, and he has uploaded this full lesson to plainenglish.com/411. Coming up today, the case of 3 people caught up in a controversy of global proportions. A high-profile tech executive in China and 2 Canadians named Michael lived in detention for over 1,000 days. They were pawns in a global conflict between America, China, and Canada. Today and on Monday, we'll talk about what happened and how they came home. The English expression we'll review today is against your will, and we have a song of the week from JR. This is a story of 3 people caught up in the American-Chinese rivalry. Meng Wanzhou is the Chief Financial Officer, the CFO, of Huawei, a Chinese manufacturer of telecommunications equipment. Michael Spavor is a Canadian who formed a non-governmental organization, an NGO, that supports cultural and business exchanges between China and North Korea. And Michael Kovrig is a former Canadian diplomat who works at a pro-peace think tank. They all have something in common. They were detained by a foreign government and held for over 1,000 days. They also have this in common. They went home on September 24th, 2021. Here's what happened. Relations between the U.S. and China have been strained for some time. The U.S. accuses China of human rights violations, intellectual property theft, and unfair trade practices. China, for its part, believes the U.S. is interfering in its domestic policies and is unfairly trying to prevent China from rising to great power status politically, technologically, and economically. One of the flashpoints in the strained relationship is a company called Huawei. Some of you may have Huawei phones. Huawei is the world's 2nd largest manufacturer of smartphones behind Samsung. But the company also makes something else, the critical network equipment needed to support the internet and cell phone service, including new 5G wireless connections that carriers are eager to roll out. Huawei is a privately held company. It is not owned by the government. Still, the U.S. government suspects that there may be secret ways for the company or China to spy on activity that takes place using Huawei's data transfer equipment. The company insists that this isn't possible and that it would never share customer data with the Chinese government in any case. Regardless, under both the Trump and Biden administrations, the U.S. has tried to pressure countries to use other suppliers for their upgrade to 5G networking. In addition, the U.S. alleges that Huawei purposely lied to a bank to get around economic sanctions against Iran. The sanctions prevent banks from making loans and facilitating payments to companies working in Iran. Banks that use the American financial system are not allowed to work with companies that have ties to Iran, and banking customers must truthfully disclose their activities and relationships to their banks so that the banks can follow the rules. Well, the U.S. Department of Justice alleges that Huawei lied to its bank, HSBC. The allegations say that Huawei told HSBC that certain economic activity was for itself, when really it was for a subsidiary that did business in Iran. If that really happened, then those false statements would be bank fraud. In December 2018, Meng Wanzhou, the CFO and daughter of Huawei's founder, was traveling from China to Argentina to attend a conference. She changed planes in Vancouver, where she owns a home. When she got off the plane, Canadian police arrested her, acting on an American warrant. The charges were bank fraud. China was furious. China believed that the arrest was political and that the U.S. was using her arrest as part of its geopolitical campaign against Huawei. But China wasn't just furious with America for issuing the arrest warrant, they were furious with Canada for enforcing it. Days later, two Canadians, Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig, were arrested in China and accused of spying and providing state secrets to external actors. It was clearly an act of retaliation against Canada. For over 1,000 days, Ms. Meng was held in Vancouver, and the two Michaels were held in China. Their fates intertwined, but they were not treated equally. Meng Wanzhou spent her days in one of her two multi-million-dollar mansions in Vancouver. Though she had to wear an ankle bracelet, she was free to go out and wander the city during the day. She was monitored around the clock by private security. And to add insult to injury, she had to pay for the security guards. During her free time, she took English lessons with an online tutor to pass the time. She also spent her days oil painting, reading, and working, according to Huawei. Her husband and family were able to visit. This isn't to say her life was a breeze. She was still facing the possibility of a trial in an American court, and she was detained against her will in a country not her own. But she had a team of American lawyers, Canadian lawyers, and Chinese lawyers working on her case and living in her neighborhood. Most people convicted of these crimes don't face any jail time. The two Michaels did not live in a mansion in China during their detention, and they did not have international teams of lawyers fighting on their behalf. They couldn't even talk to their families on the phone, much less see them in person. They were moved to detention facilities where they faced harsh conditions, including up to 8 hours of interrogation per day and lights on 24 hours. The two Michaels weren't placed together. They were allowed very limited visits from Canadian consular services, one brief visit every couple of months. They were so cut off from the world that one of them didn't know anything about COVID-19 until he was finally allowed a short phone call with his family months after the pandemic had started. After being held for 557 days, they were both charged with espionage, and they faced life in prison if convicted. 99% of those charged of these crimes in China are convicted. But the two Michaels weren't convicted. They flew home to Canada. And on Monday, we'll talk about how Meng Wanzhou and the two Michaels finally made it home on the same day. This is such a fascinating story. There's nothing bigger in the world now than the rivalry between America and China. They are the two biggest superpowers in the world, struggling for influence. The combined population of the three countries, including Canada, is 1.7 billion people, and yet seemingly the pressure of this huge rivalry fell on the shoulders of exactly 3 people. Today's expression is against your will. If something happens against your will, you don't agree with it. This tends to be used in a few specific situations, so we'll go through them today. The first specific situation is when you are detained. If you are being held against your will, you want to go free, but someone, the police or the government or a kidnapper, someone is stopping you from going free. If the police call and ask you to please come down to the station to answer some questions, you have the option to go or not to go, at least here in the US. But if the police come to your house, put you in handcuffs, and take you to a jail cell, you are being held against your will. You are not in agreement, but you also don't have a choice. Meng Wanzhou was being held against her will in Vancouver. Although she owns property there, she was not free to leave Canada and go home to China. She very much wanted to leave, but she was not able to do so. She was being held against her will. The second specific situation is when you are being told to do something that you disagree with, but you must do it anyway. We reserve this expression for situations that are serious. For example, there are plenty of things that I have to do in life that are not exactly what I want to do. A lot of these things happen at my place of employment, but I don't usually say against my will unless it's very serious. For example, here in the US, large companies are starting to require that people be vaccinated as a condition of their employment. Many workers don't want to get vaccinated against COVID-19. It's not a viewpoint that I hold, but many people hold that position sincerely. But they also can't afford to lose their jobs. So these individuals are getting the vaccine against their will. They don't want to do it, but they feel they have to in order to keep their job. Other people might be going to their workplace against their will. They might feel unsafe returning to work, or they might simply prefer working remotely. But their employers might require them to come into the office to work. If this is a requirement, then those workers might have to go to work against their will. Finally, a related way of using against your will is when you are forced to sign a statement or make a statement that you disagree with. Do you remember Roman Protasevich? He was the Belarusian journalist that was detained in Minsk. He was taken off the plane against his will. He has since resurfaced. On state television in Belarus, he gave statements that are the opposite of his previously expressed viewpoints. He praised the Belarusian leader, Alexander Lukashenko. He was obviously forced to make this statement against his will. He was an opposition journalist. It's unlikely that he had a change of heart after having been plucked out of the sky by his country's dictator. This was a hostage video. He was forced to make that statement against his will. JR's song of the week is Rolling in the Deep by Adele. She released a new album on October 15th called 30, the age at which she divorced her husband. The album will reportedly be about her divorce. She's giving interviews, she's on magazine covers, and the world is breathlessly awaiting the release of her new music in 6 years. Rolling in the Deep is from her 2010 album called 21. This was her first #1 song in the US, and it was the one that propelled her to global stardom. I'm looking forward to hearing her new songs. The first one came out just a few days ago, and it set a record for the most streams on Amazon Music. So her fans are obviously excited to dive into the new music. That's all for today. Congratulations on making it to the end of another plain English lesson. Remember, we'll pick this topic up again on Monday. Specifically, we'll talk about how Ms. Meng and the two Michaels made it home after their long detentions. What are you doing after this? I'll tell you what I'm doing. I'm going to go back to the top and record this lesson again. But I'm going to go fast this time. I'm going to read the lesson exactly the way I'd read it to an American audience. And I do that with every single plain English lesson. This is the slow version. But if you're ready to take that next step and listen at full speed, then you can do that as a member of Plain English Plus. If you join today, you'll get access to the fast version of every lesson going back to number 179. Now, it is true that some podcast apps let you mechanically speed up the program, but that's not the same as listening to full speed English, because at full speed, we pronounce things differently and we combine words. And one way to really train your ear is to listen to the slow version first to get an understanding of the topic, and then listen to the fast version to see how much you can catch at full speed. If you're ready to do that, if you're ready to take that next step with us, then come check us out at plainenglish.com/plus. And by the way, the fast version is one of many, many ways that Plain English Plus can help you with your listening. All the details are at plainenglish.com/plus. Check that out. And don't forget, we'll be right back here on Monday. See you then.